My name's Arum Diamond. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Arkestro. This is by far my favorite session of the day because there's nothing more fun than talking about talent. I've had the pleasure of building and leading teams internationally. And the way this started is I was talking to Jean-Michel probably about 6 months ago. We had done business for a while, and we really started to talk about what we cared about in terms of values. He said, well, do you really want to know what I care about? I said, yeah. He said, well, it may not even be about the Arkestro platform. Are you still interested? I said, yeah, like, what is it? Like, don't leave me hanging. He said, talent. He said, it's all about the people. And he started talking about some concepts that just blew my mind. And I had lived in Europe for a little bit. Obviously, Jean-Michel's from Europe. We talked about the differences in European and American education system, and I said, that's what we need to talk about at Optimal, and I want to be involved, and other people want to be involved. And so what we're going to do today is Jean-Michel is going to give an overview. You saw a little bit earlier. He's going to talk about talent. Then we have a great panel that's going to come up, and we're going to continue the conversation. And then we're going to open it up to the audience. If you're up for it, we think that'll be a lot more fun. It's unscripted. We don't know what you're going to ask, and I think that'll be the most fun of our 45 minutes. Thank you for being here, and thank you for challenging us on such a big topic.
Thank you, Aaron.
The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. That's a great topic. I love that conversation we started a few months ago, as you said, because it's something I noticed coming from Europe. My accent is not from Chicago, although I live there, but and it's something I've seen. Big difference between France, I would say Europe, but France for sure. I know other countries like Switzerland have also that kind of training. But the big difference, and we can start if it works. Yes. So the big difference is like we are all full of biases. And the one thing I put some differences that always make me laugh between US and France. And the first one, it's like, well, first you tipping for everything. We are not tipping at all. You have the way to celebrate success on graduates. It's fun, it's party. We just go see if our name is on the list. So it's very, very boring. And also you drive very big cars, and you still think that we're driving that kind of cars in France. So just for fun, it's just a few differences. But back to the topic, one of the main differences I found it's a lot of time in the US, more than in Europe, supply chain is embedding procurement and strategic sourcing. And here I put the main activities of a supply chain team. And yes, there are integration with procurement, of course, we work together, but they are not strategic sourcing. And then this is strategic sourcing. And the activities are not exactly the same. And as a matter of fact, they are totally different jobs. And I'm happy in my company, we actually separate supply chain and strategic sourcing. And I know it's not always the case. And then it's back to, I was wondering why it was like this in the US. And then when I start to hire people to build a team in the US, the big challenge I found was to find people with a strategic sourcing degree. And there is none. And most of the people, when I ask them, how did you come to strategic sourcing? They tell me it's in fact by accident, because there was an opportunity at a certain point of time. They wanted a change. There was nowhere else almost to go. So procurement was a good opportunity for them at that time. There is plenty of stories, different, for good or bad reasons. But nobody came as a choice of career. Not any single one has told me when I recruited that the choice of career was to be in procurement. And for me, it's a big problem, because I want to build teams. And I want to build the future of the team and the future of the talent. And technology is moving. I mean, I guess we had a great example with Arkestro and the features that were presented to us this morning. Everything is moving forward. And why we don't have the education for that? So a few observations, like little strategic sourcing education US. You have in some supply chain masters, few hours of strategic sourcing. No masters. Unless someone knows of a master of strategic sourcing in the US, please tell me. I didn't find one. And I've been in 12 years. most procurement fall into sourcing by accident. And there is a cultural gap in this topic between Europe and US. In France, so if I want to hire someone in procurement, I go to the 5 or 6 main business schools, and they have a master of strategic sourcing. And I will hire someone who has already been trained in some concept, in some tools, in crowdlogic metrics, in cost models, in relationship management, in all of that. And it's easy to integrate. Every time I hire in the US, the first thing I do, it's a long training. So question is like, how to get people trained? And, sorry, a bit too fast. How to attract young talents if we cannot promise them an education of a master? How do they want to have a career in procurement? It's not going to happen. And how to involve the education system also. And everybody here in the room, if we are in the procurement, we have a role to play on that. We have a role to play on that to help the talent companies like us to get the right education. So we train them, but I would like not to be the only one to train them. I would like the education system to fix that gap. I would like companies that are our suppliers to fix that gap. Companies like Arkestro can help fix that gap. I think we have all a role to play. So the procurement is a huge impact on companies, and you all know that. It's between 20 to 60% of the revenue. If you are in consulting, it's probably more 20%. If you are in the manufacturing like us, it's more 60, 57 for us, actually. We have been in crisis lately, and we have to check the bottom lines, and we don't have the talent to do that. And we need to build resilience, and we still don't have the talent to do that. This morning, I shared a few ideas on how to build the resilience with the SRM, with the ESG, with the innovation, with all of that. And we don't have talent skilled to do that. So for me, there is a gap there. So all of us have a role to play to embed technology, supplier relationship, ESG in skills for the new generation of talent that we want to have in strategic sourcing. And so I shared that this morning, but with my good friend Heitor, we discussed with UIC, University of Illinois Chicago, and they shared the same fact. And actually, we were discussing with the head of supply chain masters in UIC, and I shared that, and he said, yes, let's do something about it. So we did a training, and actually, they accepted it, and we are very happy to roll it out starting in January in UIC. And we're going to teach that training, and that's great, because we are not talking about anything else than strategic sourcing. And it's full credit for masters and full credit for undergrads. And that's great. It's a first step. That's not the only step, but that's the first step. And I'm very happy to be part of it because I've been complaining about that for a long time. So I wanted to share that with you, that fact. We may agree or disagree, it's perfectly fine. And we will be here to discuss about that. But that's something that was really close to me for a long time that I've been in the US. And I was very happy to share that with Arum and to be here today to discuss with you. Thank you very much.
Anat? That's great. I'm going to ask the panelists to come on up, please. And yeah, amazing. I mean, I spoke with Jean-Michel, sit wherever you please.
All right.
4 or 5 months ago, and he had this idea. I checked in with him. He said, "Oh yeah, it's up and running. We're already launching and doing it." In fact, it's the first university procurement course that I've heard of in a major university, and it started with you and your idea. I'm trying to read the body language here in the room because I'm hoping that you have some provocative, tough questions, because we, the panel, are so excited to do that. But we're going to start off with some things we thought you would care about. Rather than me tell you who these people are, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. At Arkestro, we say be brief and be brilliant. So that means 2 minutes if you like to quantify it. Please introduce who you are, your background, and maybe just your thesis statement on talent and why you even were interested in this subject, and then we'll get into the deep questions.
Well, good morning. Good afternoon. I am Marc. I'm a professor of practice at the Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. In addition to teaching, a great proportion of my time is spent working with companies in the areas of procurement, logistics, and their intersection. Prior to academia, I led merchandising and buying and rebuying teams at Walmart's headquarters, and that is coming before that some experience in banking and consulting in the supply chain space. Pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Great. I guess I'm next. Let's see. I am Gregory Heim. I'm professor of information. Oh, wait, I'm reading the wrong line here. My name is Dr. Azadegan, because that's what they call me, disrupted professor at Rutgers Business School. I've been teaching procurement for a long time, since I got to Rutgers back in 2012. And yes, perhaps we can talk about this, but a good 3 weeks of my procurement course is on strategic sourcing. So we do teach it, even though it's not necessarily a certificate or a program by itself. I'll make it short to make sure it was in 2 minutes. I got my a PhD from Arizona State University, and my research gets into supply chain disruption and resilience. Since 2013, I've been working on it. You can look up, I've got quite a number of publications in that arena. With regards to talent, if I were to put a framework around how I look at it, is based on the fact that talent management, if you look at it from an ongoing basis, it needs continued renewal, which is not very different from the notion of disruption. If you think about the fact that technology and the needs for new talent is ever changing, and I'll explain a bit more about that a little later, but the bottom line is that the software program that I used to need for my courses to graduate is very different, perhaps, from other colleagues and from the kids that they use right now. So it's a continued change, and so that falls into a disruption, innovative disruption, a good disruption. So talent management needs to match this notion of ever-changing needs and ever-changing talent, because none of us are going to be, hopefully, the same today as we are tomorrow. Every day that we passes by, if we're staying with our careers, we're growing. So talent management is how do you manage the growth of the talent while managing the change as it occurs. So that's my framework on talent management. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dan Coor, and I am not a professor. I lead procurement for a software company called Sprinkler, and I think I may differ from some of the panelists, and I specialize in indirect procurement, and I really focus on high-growth software companies. So where traditional supply chain and direct sourcing concerns on the talent side are very different than mine on the indirect side, where we're primarily sourcing software and services. I've been in procurement my whole career, and unlike a lot of you, I was very intentional in coming to this career. I learned that I liked to negotiate, I learned that I liked contracts, and my dad, being a tech guy, was like, there's this profession called procurement, which they didn't tell me about on procurement or on career day, and here I am. I've been running RFPs since I was about 10. I would put together a bomb of all of the skateboard materials that I needed, and I would go to every skate shop in town and get the lowest price, and then now I do it for a living. So it's pretty amazing to be here, and from the talent front, I think in the indirect space, again, it's quite different, but our biggest negotiations are internal. Finding out what our stakeholders want and how do we serve them. Is cost important? Is risk mitigation important? Is speed to market important? The negotiations with suppliers are pretty straightforward. They want to maximize margin, we want to minimize it. And that, I think, is pretty easy to teach on the indirect side. What's harder to teach is those emotional and EQ type of things. So when I manage talent and when I hire for talent, I want to make sure I have people that are service-focused and service-minded, that are there to support the business and make sure they have the right tools so they can be successful and have the right demeanor to go work with suppliers in a way that creates true partnerships and not just going for the lowest cost, where maybe if you're buying sea freight or logistics, absolutely, run RFQs and get it for the lowest cost possible. But on the indirect side, I think the talent is a little different and requires some more nuance to those relationships.
I am Greg Heim, and I'm a professor in the Department of Information and Operations Management at Mays Business School and Texas A&M University. And how I came to this interest in this space and in talent is for the past 15 years, ever since I joined Texas A&M University, I have been teaching a course called Information Technology for Supply Chain Management. And as part of that course, I've had the honor and pleasure to be able to write some discussion cases that I use in my course that kind of digs into exactly what happens when procurement professionals and sourcing professionals are either looking to identify new technologies to use to support their jobs or companies, and also from the sell side of exactly what happens when a company like Arkestro develops a technology and tries to sell it to those who need technology. So as part of that, one of the interesting things about our program is probably 50% of our students enter the procurement or sourcing types of roles. So that's a sizable number of students every year. However, from my perspective of technology to support supply chain or technology to support procurement roles, when I try to interest the students in the technology enablement of procurement, they generally push back that they seem to want to not be going down the technology path. So from my perspective, we've been looking at really how to change that mindset and how to create better industry relationships, because I think my position on talent management is that we need to re-engineer quite a lot of the ways in which we are presently educating undergraduates as well as graduate students about the role and the need for technology in, supply chain broadly and procurement and sourcing specifically.
That's great. You guys were all brief and brilliant, which was perfect. Would you like to respond?
So one of the things I didn't do, Arum, was give
Yes.
my thesis on talent. Can I take a couple seconds to do it?
As long as you're brief and brilliant, absolutely.
I will be brief, hopefully brilliant. One of the things that I believe is my overarching thesis on talent with regard to procurement is that exceptional outcomes in technology-enabled procurement performance is highly contingent on the acquisition of talent or people that possess an optimal balance between deep functional expertise and technical capability. And the ability to acquire that type of talent is most often driven by intentional talent development programs that are often more successful when they're done in collaboration between firms, industry associations, and universities. That's what I've seen, that's what I believe. Hopefully I was brief.
That was great. We're going to go rapid response to get as many questions in here, and more importantly from the audience, but that was great. We know you, so you don't need to introduce. No. So Dr. Arash, we know about the supply chain shortages.
Right.
We never talk about it in terms of talent.
Right.
Is there a relationship between the talent profile or talent in the industry and supply chain?
Well, as far as causality, no. I don't think talent shortage caused the disruptions, so just to be clear. But as far as the need for talent to manage the disruptions, absolutely yes. And lo and behold, that question was given to me beforehand, and dare I say, the wireless on the airplane was not working, so I had time to reflect on this, maybe a bit too much. So bear with me. What happens with disruptions? There's three stages within a disruption, right? There's a response, there's recovery, and then there's a learning afterwards that occurs. If you look at supply chain disruptions from that perspective, it's really no different than the ambulance coming from you get grandpa to the ER, then he stays there and recovers, and then grandpa goes home, and we learn from the fact that maybe you shouldn't have so much alcohol and snacks in your diet. Nevertheless, how do we overlap the need for talent management on top of that? Well, in terms of response, you need folks that can actually act very, very quickly. In terms of recovery, this becomes essentially very similar to what Arkestro does on the price or the cost front. But from a talent management standpoint, you need folks that can truly and effectively dive deep. And also from a learning standpoint, that's where talent management needs to be forward-looking, right? As to what do I need next now that COVID is over, on what type of talent do I need for the next 5 years or so. So you see, talent management and supply chain disruptions, it's almost like a 3x3 matrix, if you will, with regards to who do I need to place in these pockets of needs as it goes forwards. And it's wonderful to have recovered from disruptions. And I'll just put one more plug in here to say this is the time for folks, because now we have all the cards on the table. We know what happened with COVID. We don't have a response. We don't have a recovery. We're in the learning mode. And so now we have the entire picture of what we need in terms of talent management to be implemented.
No, that's very insightful. Thank you. So you started this. You called it out. You said our education system is weak here and Europe is better. Actually, you said France, not Europe. I noticed when you said that.
There are other countries than France.
Oh, that's right. But don't hold back. Why do you think that is? What's going on? You and I spoke about Americans getting degrees in Sanskrit and other things. I mean, let us have it. What's really wrong with the system here? What do you want to change?
Well, I don't know if it's wrong. I would not say it's wrong. I would say there is a gap. I think it's tied to what made America such a great country. It's the fact that you guys know how to sell, you know, and you are very good at that. And you grow and focus on the top line for much longer than you focus on the bottom line. And that, for me, one of the reasons, there is a cultural, reason to that. So it's not that the education system is failing or whatsoever. That's not the point here. It's really a cultural gap. And as a matter of fact, it led to that state of facts that I was outlining earlier, which here, when I came here, it was, okay, now I need my master's of procurement, and I was not able to find them. And even you can see that, and I think it's a difference in maturity based to those cultural gaps. Even today, if I have someone ask me what I do for a living, and I say I do procurement, most of the people don't even know what it means. Mm-hmm. And when I say it in France that I'm doing procurement, they don't know what I do every day, but they know what it relates to. It relates to. And that's mind-blowing when you see that, And the same, I think, in the companies, how many of you, if you are an organization that, and we were there a few years ago, are not mature enough, and then they tell you, oh, you're in procurement, so you negotiate price. I mean, how much of your time do you spend negotiating price? And on top of that, Arkestro is coming soon, we are out of a job on top of that. So I think there is this, mainly it comes from that cultural gap. I do believe that.
That's it. Well, Dan, we were talking yesterday and said, what are you passionate about? And you said, well, I don't know if I want to fight on the education system, but you said you have a lot to say about the talent pool and what's changed and COVID. Tell us about the talent pool.
Yeah, I think we probably all experienced a shortage in the talent pool and maybe some wage inflation and increased expectations in that space. But what I think's changed in procurement talent from when I started in this industry to today is when I began 14 or 15 years ago, price was the glaring factor that we all focused on. And to Jean-Michel's comment, when people say, what do? You do procurement, you must be great at buying cars or negotiating. And that's what I hired for in the beginning of my career, and that's what was really critical. But today, especially in the indirect space, cost is no longer the number one KPI. It's certainly something we report on and the CFO cares about. But at the end of the day, procurement is a service function of a company. We enable our stakeholders to have the tools and the goods they need to go get their jobs done and to drive revenue. So we need to be building teams and managing talent in a way that is service-focused, that builds relationships internally and builds relationships with our suppliers. And for the companies I work at, high-growth software companies, speed to market is much more important than price, making sure people have the right tool at the right time. And certainly, if we do our jobs right, we'll have some savings and we can negotiate, but our stakeholders don't care about that. Mm-hmm. And we need to create teams that are service-minded and have those soft skills. And when we talk about supply chain shortages, we've got containers on ships sitting outside of Long Beach at ports. But there's also supply chain shortages in the software space and in the services space. And we need to hire and manage talent in a way that develops relationships that are really partnerships. And we bandy that word around a lot, partnerships. But when PPE gets scarce, are those suppliers going to give it to the company that just kneecapped them on price, or are they going to give the PPE to the company that was truly a partner and worked with them to be innovative? And that goes with services. And when people don't have the right talent, where are those services going to get allocated to? The people that were difficult to work with, or the people that were great customers and good corporate partners? And so when I think about managing talent and how it's changed, I no longer say who's going to be the most vicious negotiator. That can be taught. I want to find people that have those soft skills, that can be crisis management for the business, that can create relationships internally and externally that empower the business to keep moving forward and to ultimately drive revenue by empowering our stakeholders.
Excellent, that's great. Mark, we spoke yesterday, and your eyes lit up when we started talking about the acquisition of talent. And I was going to start out what would you see different in technology? You have a lot of ideas around how people coming through the education system should be thinking about technology. Can you share what you've seen, what's working, and maybe a mistake as well?
Okay, definitely. So I would say there are two overarching dynamics that I see when it comes to early career practitioners in procurement. And I define early career as probably 3 to 5 years in addition to students that are preparing to get into the space, right? The overarching issue I've seen is that generally when we talk about us as an industry communicating to these particular talent pools to develop them, there's often a mismatch between the content of the message and the audience. What do I mean by that? So take this scenario, right? I was recently at a procurement conference. Early stage procurement professionals sat in one of the sessions to speak about technology and technology's impact on procurement. The content, the audience there were people that were 2 to 3 years in. They were basically commodity managers, buyers, or procurement analysts. The presenters, with all good intention, were presenting on AI's impact on procurement performance. What they intentionally did, however, was went into a discourse on deep learning and neural networks. Right? And the ROI for that particular audience was not necessarily high in that instance. Mm-hmm. And I believe it could be distilled to us as a group when it comes to developing talent, understanding the audience and presenting our case in 2 particular categories. One, there is an audience that will be delighted to engage in the conversation on what is this technology doing? Right? What is this technology? How does it work? There's an audience for that. The other audience we need to frame the question, what does this technology enable? Right? And it's a very slight difference, but it's a significant difference, right? Because we need to understand the particular audience. Now, the second point, in terms of also determining the audience, is that there is the need to have these very quantifiable business cases to show how technology in the early stage of your career could impact not only the performance of what you do, but your particular standing and prevalence as a procurement professional. What does that mean, right? So we have these instances where, as we present these business cases, we need to ensure that we don't position enabling technologies as just these mechanisms that helps us to become this super amazing cost center, right? We're not just going to improve on cost center performance here, but how could we take these technologies and articulate them and integrate them early on in careers to show the strategic value of procurement and how procurement actually impacts top-line growth? Those are the 2 areas I've seen.
Thanks, Greg. I hope you're thinking of good and tough questions because we're almost to that point. But Greg, you and I were talking yesterday, and you talked about this kind of push and pull of traditional business content and technology. What are you doing in the university right now in these courses around the technology side? And tell us how you rotate and make sure you don't over or under rotate to get these people prepared for the workforce with the new technology.
Well, I think what I have to say kind of reflects on Jean-Michel as well as Marc's statements. For 15 years trying to convince students to have passion about technology, and part of what I think is a challenge with that is, as you said, we have cultural things, and some of it is structural too. I think culturally we may have a little bit of a fear of technology that's ingrained into youth, even though we all think that because they're watching streamers all day or playing video games constantly and they're used to that. When you pose them with the opportunities of enterprise technology, it's more like, oh no, I may be good at video games, but I don't want to go there. And then we have a cultural and structural issue that most of our teaching about technology or teaching about procurement and sourcing tends to come at the end of the university education. So sometime maybe late junior year, or even like my course always gets jammed right at the end of 4 years, when really it should be much earlier. And so we have been actually going on visiting tours out to, we're trying to develop a new technology initiative to encourage our students to be more open to technology-enabled careers. And we've been visiting Seattle and visiting Silicon Valley, and what we found is that those jobs, the technology-enabled jobs, really need us to invert the way that we've been delivering our education. So these cultural and structural things, we're going to have to re-engineer and take a lot of the, I mean, if we want students to do IT-enabled procurement, we're going to need to move that more to probably early sophomore year, take the technology stuff, move that to sophomore year, because top firms are looking for that early introduction to it so you can feed those students into the internship programs and opportunities like that. So really, I think it's a great time to be thinking about trying to re-engineer university education, whether it's at the undergraduate level or master's programs, MBA programs. But it's something that I think all universities are on the lookout for corporate partners who can kind of stimulate that, can provide the message of what you all need, or what you all need us to do, and then you can partner with us for a couple of years probably to make that re-engineering happen.
That's great. Should I give him a tough one? Yeah? All right. Yeah, we'll give him a tough one.
Would love to respond to you really quick. So you're saying the students you have an aversion to technology-enabled procurement. And that is a little different than my experience, where when I'm interviewing and hiring more entry-level people, it almost seems like there's an expectation of a really robust tech stack. And people don't want to come work somewhere that's running procurement off of email and spreadsheets. I think when we look at our personal lives, and we have cell phones and laptops, and we're using software for everything all the time, we buy things on Amazon, and it comes to our house in 2 days. So buying in our private lives is really easy. Then we come to work, and buying is a lot harder if we don't have the right technology. And I think when I think from a management of talent standpoint, I think there's an expectation to attract and retain really good talent, to have the best technology that people can use to be empowered. And like earlier in one of the keynotes, I think Edmund or someone said, you have to meet these people where they are. And technology should be really easy and intuitive. There shouldn't be a 5-page training and a 30-minute course you have to do. You turn on Netflix at home, you didn't read a user's manual, you just knew how to use it. And that's this piece of SaaS software. That's how it should work in our professional lives. And I think there's some archaic procurement tools out there. I'm sure we all know some names. But when I look at the suppliers here and I look at what Arkestro is doing, that's where my expectation is for technology. And I think a lot of the talent that I talk to and manage, that's their expectation too, that it really empowers them. And if we have the right technology and we automate things like Arkestro does, then we can up-level those teams, kind of like Marc's talking about, to be more strategic and to do really cool stuff and not sit there and go through $5,000 contracts in our tail spend. We can do cooler stuff with technology.
I like it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go down the panel, and on this vein is, tell us the one thing that you've gotten wrong, or that's changed your mind, or maybe that you disagree with here. They want to hear the gory stuff, and then we'll open up to Q&A. So you can either respond in something different, or at minimum tell us something that you've gotten wrong or where your position has changed since you started your career. Let's just come down the panel and then we'll open up to the audience.
Okay, I'll be brief with two things quickly. I have an alternative perspective on Jean-Michel's thesis regarding procurement education here, and it actually ties into a lesson I learned. So one of the things I believe that, for instance, we do, I know other schools do it here in the US, and we do it at the University of Arkansas, is we teach to what we call the T, right? So the letter T. So there's this, you teach procurement to a particular, for those that want to specialize in procurement to a specific depth, right? But deep functional experience in procurement has to be supported or has to be partnered with or aligned to some level of understanding across the integrated supply chain. So what we've seen is procurement professionals that we teach procurement tend to have more successful cross-functional interactions because they understand procurement within the context of an integrated supply chain. So that's a sort of a complementary view to yours, because there's facts in what obviously you're presenting. I've seen something that's sort of counterfactual in a way in that. And what drove that was a particular lesson I learned. And it's at the individual level and the team level, and I'll be really quick. One of the things at the individual level I saw is that at one particular time I was leading a team where we had to buy a particular category. We negotiated well, we did good supply analysis, held the suppliers accountable, all the lovely things we do in procurement, right? But a mistake I made was because of a lack of understanding at that particular point in time as to how two other functions executed based on my buy, the overall performance was diminished. And the lesson I learned there actually was when teaching procurement embedded within the cross-functional nature of supply chains, and that's why I say teach to the T. So that is what I would say. That's a lesson based on some experience, but that's one data point.
That's great. Dr. Arash, anything
So,
contrarian, biggest mistake, something gory?
Sure. Well, actually, if it's all right, I think I'd like to just address Greg's perspective versus Dan's perspective. And I think while I agree more with Dan, I think there's a bridge here to be made, and maybe it can be summarized by the term caveat emptor and buyer beware. What do I mean by that? Students in my university come with this thirst for technology. They want to know a lot. They want to know the latest and greatest software, the latest and greatest platform, be it ERP, Ariba, whatever it might be. But then they jump in, right? And the first student signs up for a really, really tough course and doesn't get a good grade, right? And then they realize, oh, gee, this is not as easy as I thought. He or she is going to tell all their friends, and their friends are not going to be they're going to be very reluctant to join in for your courses, perhaps over others, and that kind of snowballs. So how do we fix that? And that is, again, by caveat emptor, making sure they realize what they're signing up for, but also realizing that this is how the real life is going to be once they get out of school. This is not going to be just, plug and go, so to speak, as easily. So as far as lessons go, what we have learned is, we start very, very early now. We actually are going to high schools. We're talking to folks in high school. And we're also emphasizing the need for technology. The good thing is that you're absolutely right, or you were mentioning the cell phone thing. The kids these days are very, very familiar with technology. They're not gun shy of it at all. However, realizing that the type of technology we're talking about here and diving deep and living with it is very different than just coming and going. What else are we doing in terms of lessons learned? I'll mention one other thing, and that is that we do a lot of orientation. I spend a lot of time talking to the folks and about the different programs. We have a Master's of Analytics, we have a Master's of Supply Chain, we have a regular MBA with a concentration. So different flavors for different folks, if you will, right? The level of the emphasis that they want to get. So we are able to customize to the talent to the extent that they want. And I think that works out pretty well. Of course, we're a larger size organization, so that is much more easy, but nevertheless, I think here all three of us are from larger size organizations. So
We promised the audience that they could ask some questions, and it says 5 minutes here, but I got a 1 minute paddle there. I don't know what's going on. Is it 1 minute? Is it 5 minutes? But we're going to sneak in a couple questions. Throw us a tough one, but when you ask the question, give it to one person to do the answer, if you don't mind, please. And
Okay.
Josh has a microphone here.
Yeah, I have a microphone. Also, a quick announcement. We're going to do a poll at the end, so if you don't have the mobile app downloaded already, please just download it real quick. But pull it open, go to the agenda, and you should see a poll turn up there.
So if you
when
raise
you
your
hit
hand,
this
Josh will
item
bring
on the
the
agenda.
mic.
Did you have a question?
Question? Make it a good one. And Ren, direct who you want to answer.
Well, you kind of ruined it because I wanted to open it up to the panel.
Unfortunately, with time we don't.
Okay,
but
so-
you have to pick your favorite.
So the person who can bubble over with this, the conversation so far have been talking about development of new talent, meaning people who are at the beginning of their career. You're talking about people who have the time and resources to be professional students. What do you think can be done to develop existing talent, people who are already in the workforce, who now have a better sense of what the need is, and they got a stronger desire to improve. They have strong opinions. If you want to go ahead and answer that.
I'll try and make it for 30 seconds so everybody has a chance if they do. We believe at Rutgers, we're hopefully ahead in that regard, and that is because we're developing what's called micro-level courses, very similar to certificates, and you can literally pick and choose from 50 different topics and pull it together the way you want it. You can make it into a certificate, or you can carry on forward. We recognize the need for continuous improvement and continuous education, but higher education hasn't done a very good job of that, right? And therefore, there's so many outlets for certificates and whatever else. We'd like for it to be ours. And so that's how we do it. It's just a matter of working, which we are also doing with our board. We have a supply chain board of directors that give us feedback, right? And so that's in a very short way, that's the answer to your question is small bites.
I think we'll be able to squeeze in two more. And again, the conversation doesn't stop here, it starts. This is the good stuff.
Yeah, maybe I should just continue. Martin Beck, procurement at BSF. Talent management, yeah? Part to do talent management is to be attractive to talents and get them. And maybe my question to Jean-Michel, what do you tell your candidates you have, your talents, what's your career path within procurement or within the organization to really be attractive for the talents then later? Yeah? That you really get the top-notch students or people out there in your organization.
So there are two answers to that. In the US, if I understood well the question, so in the US, when I get people, I try to assess more their soft skills and train them after to what is, procurement hard skills. In Europe, we know we will have already people with those hard skills coming from those schools having their masters. So that's two different paths. I've been training people, and to your point earlier, I've been training people coming from the plant in totally different positions, and you were talking about certifications, and I brought them, I trained them to what it means to us in strategic sourcing, and they are very successful today. So there is not one only path. There are several paths. But there is, I think, a need of laying out everything available to us when we want to recruit. And we need both. We need to promote internally, we need to train people internally, we need the help of universities for that, but we need also people that are already trained, because we cannot always make the heavy lift. We have also to get people that are ready to run and to be the leaders of tomorrow. And that's kind of the big gap, that we try to accommodate. I hope I answer.
Thank you for the questions. We have run out of time, but if you're passionate about this subject and you want to see more of this from us and these speakers and others, we're really excited about this. We think so much about talent. But thank you to the panelists. We can give them a round of applause, please. Thank you.